Hari Om. Today's lesson is a continuation of chapter 14 of Bhagavad Gita. We will continue from verse 9 onwards. Let us recap what Krishna has covered so far in the past verses. This chapter deals with the division of the three gunas, sattvic, rajasic and tamasic. And Krishna explained to us that this entire creation is made up of Prakriti, which is matter, plus Purusha, which is consciousness. And part and parcel of this matter of Prakriti are the three gunas. They are found in Prakriti and they do not affect the Purusha. So how do these three gunas affect Prakriti? Krishna spoke about the characteristics of sattvic gunas in verse number 6. And in verse number 6, he mentioned anybody who has a predominance of sattvic gunas will be very pure in their thoughts, will be naturally inclined towards receiving and absorbing and retaining knowledge. And for rajasic gunas, the Lord said in verse number 7 that this person who is rajasic guna predominant, he will be very prone to greed and he will be driven by desires. So a lot of selfish activities. And then in verse number 8, he explained about the characteristics of a tamasic person who will be prone to laziness, sleep, etc. And Krishna also told us that all the three gunas have a binding effect on us. That means all three are a hindrance to our ultimate spiritual growth. How does sattvic gunas bind us? When we attain or when we receive a certain amount of knowledge, then we become very happy, our mind becomes peaceful, many doubts and ignorance is removed, so a person becomes content. And Swami Chinmayananda said a very beautiful statement. He said, reading a cookbook is not the remedy to hunger. If you're hungry, you can read hundreds of cookbooks, you can memorize hundreds of recipes, but until you don't put that into application, you go and buy the what we call vegetables, etc., and you actually what we call do the action of cutting and cooking, and finally you have to eat and digest the food. So in the same way, knowledge to a certain point, we have to understand when we have so much of knowledge, the next important step is to what we call to apply it in our lives. Otherwise, it's only book knowledge. It only remains up in the head here. So therefore, Krishna says, be very careful, because sattvic gunas bind us to happiness. They bind us to a state of contentment, and we do not proceed further than this. How do rajasic gunas bind us? Because a rajasic person is driven by greed, therefore he is bound by continuous actions. One desire comes up, he satisfies the desire, another desire comes up, he again chases after the other desire. So a rajasic person's life is continuously what we call bound by acquisitions and preservation. Acquire what I don't have, I work hard to preserve, to retain or maintain what I have, my position, my power, my money, etc. I also have to work hard. And a tamasic person, how is he bound? He is bound by laziness, by carelessness, by procrastination, etc. So that is bondage. What is liberation? Therefore, liberation means how to cut in fact, the word guna has another meaning. It means ropes. So a soul is bound by these three ropes. So liberation means I must learn how to cut the tamasic rope, the rajasic rope, the sattvic rope, And ultimately, I must, I must transcend all the three gunas. So here the Lord says He will give us the key at the end of this chapter 14 how to transcend the three gunas. So this is what we've seen up to verse number 8. Now let us proceed with verse number 9 onwards. So in verse number 9, he basically summarizes what he covered in verses number 6, 7, and 8. He summarizes the attachment of the three gunas. So what does he say here? He says, Sattvam Sanjayati. Sattvam meaning sattvic gunas. Sanjayati meaning they attach or they bind, they embodied being to what? Sukhe, happiness. Because a sattvic mind craves for tranquility, it craves for peace, because it always wants an environment for contemplation. So it may not be always possible to get a tranquil, what we call quiet environment or serene conditions. And when such conditions are not available, a sattvic mind gets very disturbed, agitated, frustrated. So Krishna says one should not be unduly attached to tranquil situations, but a sattvic person must be able to handle and find peace even in noisy, turbulent condition. Because knowledge must teach us how to deal with ups and downs of life, because life is not always going to be smooth. So a sattvic person only wants a calm environment, but it is not possible all the time. What about Rajas? He says Rajas karmani. Rajas will bind a person, attach a person to karmani, actions. And a Rajasic person does not do actions to help others or to serve society. A Rajasic person driven by greed is bound by actions which are of selfish nature for his own gratification. So a Rajasic mind is bound to continuous action, very restless mind, and obsessed with acquisition and preservation. However, the Lord says, what about tamasic gunas? Tamas, Lord says, avritya. The word avritya means it envelops or it covers. What does it cover? When a person is predominant tamasic gunas, the Lord says it covers jnanam. A person is the least interested in knowledge, how to improve himself, how to what we call move further in life. So whether for job purpose or whether for the spiritual path, a tamasic person is not interested, and he craves, or rather he gives into carelessness, laziness, procrastination. There is no desire in a tamasic person to uplift his life either on the worldly path or the spiritual path. So the Lord says a tamasic person, because his mind is clouded, he doesn't acquire knowledge, therefore sanjayati, it attaches him to pramadhe. The word pramadhe used in verse number 9 means carelessness, confusion, etc. Person makes wrong decisions in life, because when a tamasic person is not empowered with the right knowledge, he or she makes blunders in life, makes wrong decisions in life, a confused person. So now the Lord has now summarized in verse number 9 the three gunas, how they bind us, how the three gunas bind us. Now, from verse number 10 now, the Lord will speak about how the three gunas activate, how the three gunas work in us, in a human being. And since all the three gunas are there in every human being, in everything in creation, the three gunas exist. The only difference is in which creation which guna dominates. For example, if we come to plants, they have predominant tamas. okay, but they have very little content of rajas and sattva, and so forth and so forth for animals and for human beings also. Uh, Now, but in the human beings, the difference is that although we are a product of the gunas, because of our past actions, we have certain predominant gunas now. But human beings have got the free will. So with our present action, we can change the quality of our gunas. So while a human being is a product of past gunas, past actions, yet a human being is not a prisoner of the gunas. We can change our attitude, we can change the direction of our life. This is the difference. So now, here the Lord also explains to us that how one guna, when it is predominant, it suppresses the other two gunas. That is the very nature of the dominating guna also. So the Lord says here, Sattva Bhavati. When sattvic gunas bhavati, they rise or their dominance. Now why? Why do sattvic gunas become dominant? When a person goes more on the spiritual path, he starts reading the scriptures, he goes to temple, he recites mantras, he he does seva or dhanam, etc. The more and more spiritual activities he does, these actions in turn make the sattvic gunas stronger and stronger. So what happens when the sattvic gunas become stronger and stronger? Lord says, Sattva Bhavati, when Sattva rises and becomes dominant, Abhibhuya, they will suppress. They will suppress what? Rajas and Tamas. These two gunas will be suppressed. So a person who was prone to selfishness, slowly as they move towards, who was more rajasic dominant, maybe prone to selfishness, slowly as he gets involved in spiritual activities, he will find his selfish nature slowly reducing and his pure nature slowly becoming stronger. This is what happens when we go on the spiritual path. And also, person is less lazier because the tamasic gunas also get suppressed. Then the Lord says in this verse 10, He says, Evam, similarly, when rajasic, raja is predominant, when rajasic gunas are predominant in an individual, when an individual gives in to more and more selfish activities and pursues the path of sense gratification, what happens? He says they will suppress sattva and tamas. So the good qualities in a person get suppressed. The tamasic qualities will also get suppressed because a rajasic person becomes very hyperactive. So this is what happens when we engage in selfish activities, in activities that are for sense gratification. Then the Lord says in the same verse 10, Tatha, in that very way, tamas, when tamasic gunas are predominant, the more and more we give in to sleep, to laziness, to procrastination, we are not interested in knowledge, the more and more we become tamasic. What happens? When tamasic gunas get stronger and stronger, they will suppress even whatever little sattva and rajas we have in us. So the person keeps on getting more and more lazier, more and more prone to mistakes, and keeps on procrastinating work. So we need to understand this is actually an evaluation of our own personality. From this we can see and we can evaluate, are we sattvic, rajasic or tamasic in nature? And if you want to improve, become more sattvic in nature, then what should we do? So that brings us now to verse number 11. Verse number 11. So in the next three verses, 11, 12 and 13, Krishna will give us what we call the manifestation. So how do I know if sattvic guna is strong in me? What kind of character will be manifesting in me? Or if rajasic guna, sattvic gunas qualities or manifestations in an individual are described in verse 11. Uh, Rajasic gunas manifestation are described in verse 12, and in verse 13, Krishna will talk about the manifestation of tamasic gunas. So, uh, now, actually, if you look at it, the Ramayana is a wonderful depiction of the three gunas. And it's reflected in the personality of the three brothers, Vibhishan, Ravan, and Kumbhakaran. Ravan was a predominant Rajasic guna. Why do we say that? Ravan was the king of Lanka. He had all the wealth, the land, beautiful wife, everything he had in abundance. Yet one thing he did not have, that was Sita. And that disturbed his mind and pushed him into action that caused his own downfall. So Rajasic mind is never content with what he has, but has a thirst for more and more. The other brother, Vibhishan, Ravan's brother, is Sattvic personality. He was the only righteous, clear-thinking one who advised his brother that it was wrong for him to kidnap another person's wife. But Ravan refused to listen to Vibhishan. And Kumbhakaran, the third brother, is Tamasic personality, who was only preoccupied in two activities: 6 months sleeping, 6 months eating. That's all he liked to do. So that is how the gunas manifest in a person. Now, in this verse number 11, Krishna will talk about the manifestation of sattvic gunas in an individual. So he says, Yada, when the prakasha, illumination of jnanam, knowledge, upajayate, radiates, asmin, in this dehe, in this body. So what he means is, in this body, what is this body? Sarva dwareshu. Sarva means all, dwareshu means doors. So what it means is, how do I know if sattvic gunas are strong in me? When all the doors of my body, meaning all the receptors, the eyes, the nose, the ear, the tongue, the skin, these are all the receptors by which we receive what we call impulses or interactions from the world. So when all the doors of body of an individual are prakasha, the illumined to receive knowledge, that means an individual has a thirst or craving to acquire knowledge, to learn as much as possible. There is a thirst. So all the senses are searching or reaching out or hankering for knowledge, for learning, for hearing, for reflecting on both material and spiritual knowledge. So the Lord says, when all the senses are enlivened and have a thirst for knowledge, that is a symbol that sattvic gunas are predominant in us. And then he says, Tadha, then with what one should know, when these characteristics are in you, then you should know that it is sattva, that sattvic gunas are vivridam. They are fully developed. They are the dominating gunas in you. If you're always seeking knowledge, if you have a thirst for knowledge, and you don't want to waste your time in pursuit of selfish activities, or you're not so inclined to eating and sleeping, but you love to pursue the path of knowledge, then understand that sattvic gunas are now predominant in you. Okay. What about rajasic gunas? In verse number 12, the Lord explains the personality or the manifestations of rajasic dominance in an individual. So in a sattvic dominant individual, his perception, his organs of reception are active. In a rajasic person, he maximizes the use of his body, his organs of action, the hands, the legs, etc. So the Lord says here, when there is lobha means greed, when there is a manifestation of greed in a person, uh, now what we call, so greed is one factor. When there is so much of greed in an individual, that means rajasic gunas are dominant in him. Now, what is the difference between desire and greed? You must understand that. What is the difference between desire and greed? Desires, when they run out of control, when they are out of control, it becomes greed. Meaning, you can never be satiated by your desires. The desires keep on multiplying, it will end in greed. So, what happens when greed is there? The second quality of a rajasic person is pravrti. Pravrti means there is endless activity, constant activity. The mind is constantly active, the body is constantly active, all the organs are constantly active. For what purpose? To satisfy this greed. So the body is constantly running here and there everywhere. And such a person just doesn't want to give time for spiritual activities. He is on the go all the time for satisfying all his desires. And therefore the Lord says, the mind is arambaha. Arambaha means constantly engage in undertaking of what? Karmanam, of actions. Mind is constantly scheming, thinking, projecting, planning how to satisfy all the things that you don't have and how to hold on to everything that you have. So mind is constantly hyperactive, and therefore he says it is asma, it is restless. There is restlessness in a rajasic person. He can't sit still. He has to be active and moving all the time, mind and body also. Spraha, there is hankering. There is constant hankering because so many desires are there to be fulfilled. And the worst point about the rajasic person is when desires cannot be fulfilled in a legitimate way, because the desires are constantly eating at his mind, then sometimes a rajasic person has to find shortcuts or illegal means how to satisfy these desires. So that's where corruption arises, exploitation arises, etc. When a person cannot control his greed, he's got so many desires, he's got a limited lifespan to satisfy the desires, he's got to find shortcuts to satisfy these desires. So the Lord says, Etani, these are the signs: greed, restlessness, endless activity. Lord says, Jayante, they come into being. Vivride, when the rajasic gunas are fully developed, when they are strong in an individual, they suppress the sattvic and tamasic gunas and they drive one to endless selfish activities. Now, the Lord in verse number 13 speaks about tamasic gunas. So, tamasic gunas are totally opposed to seeking knowledge and totally opposed to activity also. So, the Lord says when He gives 4 qualities in an individual when tamasic gunas are predominant. First is aprakasha. If you notice, when He talked about sattvic gunas, He said prakasha, illumination. Tamasic is totally opposite. Aprakasha means dullness, unfit, a mind which is unfit for understanding or comprehending knowledge. There is total dullness of the mind, incapable of absorbing or retaining any knowledge or information. Cha and apravrti. Again, rajasic person is driven to pravrti, to action. Tamasic person is apravrti, which is prone to inactivity, prone to laziness, procrastination of duties and responsibilities. Third quality, pramada, inadvertence. Inadvertence means when a tamasic person takes up activity, he is prone to making mistakes, very careless about his actions. So even causing himself problems and also causing problems to others. And the fourth quality of a tamasic personality is moha or delusion, which means in this case confusion in making right choices or decisions in life. A totally confused person keeps making mistake upon mistake upon mistake also in his life. Can't make the right decisions in life. So the Lord says when all these qualities are present, it means tamasi. Tamasic gunas are vivruddhe. They are fully developed. They are dominating and they suppress the sattvic and rajasic. So the Lord says when etani, these four signs, jayante, they come into being, then you can accept or understand that this person has got a very tamasic nature also. So now the Lord has explained the manifestations of sattvic, rajasic and tamasic gunas in verse number 11, 12 and 13. Now in the next two verses, verse 14 and 15, Krishna will speak about the ultimate result. What happens to a sattvic person, a rajasic person, a tamasic person? If you carry on this course of a sattvic personality, what is the end result? What is the end result of a rajasic personality and the end result of a tamasic personality? So in the scriptures, we are told that an individual has got three bodies. One is stula. Stula means the gross body. The second is sukshma, the subtle body, which is the mind, the intellect, etc. And the third is the karana or the causal body. Now, at the time of death, what happens? The gross body is cremated and it goes back to the five elements. So the gross body does not travel. And what about the subtle body? What travels is the subtle body, the sukshma sharira, and the causal body, the karana sharira, which contains all the imprint of the past actions. So at the time of death, the jiva has got what we call a direction of travel. When one person dies sattvic predominant, where does he go? Another person dies rajasic predominant, where does he go? And another person dies tamasic predominant, where does he go? So Lord Krishna says, Yada, when, in verse number 13, he says, Yada, when, Deha Brith means the embodied being, the soul, Yati, undergoes. So when the body undergoes pralayam, death, so what happens to the embodied being inside? What happens to the embodied being? When the gross body comes to an end, what happens to the subtle body and the causal body? Sukshma Sharira plus Karana Sharira. Along with the Jiva, he says, Sattve Pravarde. When Sattvic Gunas are Pravarde, when they are fully developed, meaning this person has predominant Sattvic Guna personality, what happens to him? He says, Tadha, then, upon death, Pratipadyate, this sattvic person, he attains. Pratipadyate means attains or goes to Amalan Lokan. Amalan means taintless. Lokan means world. So these taintless lokas are the Swarga lokas, the upper lokas. There are 6 lokas above earth, which are known as Swarga lokas. So they go there, and what happens? There are many divine pleasures to be enjoyed there. And what are these lokas? He says, Krishna says in this verse 13, he says, Vidham, where the worshippers of Uttama, higher, where all the, what we call, where high, where we call very realized souls, they reside there in these lokas. This is where a sattvic person will go. So where there are all the great saints and sages who are residing in these lokas, this is where a sattvic person will go. And these lokas are of course devoid of pain, sorrow, misery. But we must understand this is not moksha. Because when we go to Swarga Lokas, we exhaust all the good deeds that we have done, we have to come back to earth. So it is a temporary place for us to enjoy. And if you want to read more, you should refer to chapter 9, verse 20 and 21, which we have already covered earlier. So you enjoy a blissful life in Swargaloka, but that is not an ultimate destination. Okay, we have to learn how to transcend the Swargalokas and attain moksha. So we will stop here at verse number 13, and when we resume in the next lesson, we will take up from, we just completed verse 14, and when we resume the next lesson, we will carry on from verse number 15 to understand what is the direction of travel for a Rajasic dominant person and a Tamasic dominant person. Hari Om Tat Sat.